Alexander the Great was 32 years old. He had never lost a single battle in his life, and he was about to die. Not on a battlefield, not with a sword through him, not from any wound that any enemy had managed to put on his body in 13 years of the most brutal warfare the ancient world had ever seen. He had been shot by arrows. He had taken sword cuts. He had been knocked unconscious by a rock in one siege and had a spear driven through his shoulder armor in another. His generals had pulled him out of melees where he should have died a dozen times.
Macedonian.
He survived everything. He beat everyone. He went further than any commander before him or since. And then one night in Babylon in June of 323 BC, he went to a dinner party. And 11 days later, the greatest conqueror in human history was dead. The army that had followed him across 20,000 miles of desert and mountain and river stood outside his palace and could not save him. The generals who had won the world with him wept in the corridor like children. What killed him? 2,300 years later, that question still does not have a definitive answer, and the debate around it is one of the most fascinating mysteries in military history. Before we get to how he died, we need to understand what he had survived. Because Alexander's death only becomes truly astonishing when you understand exactly what his body had already been through. Alexander became king of Macedonia at 20 years old, when his father Philip II was assassinated. Within 2 years he had secured Greece, crushed a rebellion in Thebes so thoroughly that he sold the entire population into slavery as a warning, and crossed into Asia with 47,000 soldiers to attack the greatest empire on earth. At the river Granicus in 334 BCE, Alexander led his cavalry directly across the river into the waiting Persian formation before his generals could stop him. A Persian cavalry officer split his helmet with an axe and was about to deliver the killing stroke when Alexander's general Clitus cut off his arm. He was 22 years old. He had just almost died in his first major battle. He promoted Clitus on the spot and never stopped fighting. He should have died at least 6 times before he ever reached Babylon. At the siege of Tyre in 332 BCE, he stood on the deck of a ship under arrow fire from the walls to encourage his sailors. An arrow struck the ship's railing 6 inches from his hand. At the siege of Gaza, his shoulder was pierced by a siege ballista bolt. A ballista is a giant crossbow that fires bolts capable of penetrating armor. He had it extracted in the field and went back to directing the siege the same day. In India, at the river Hydaspes in 326 BCE, he fought King Porus's war elephants. 250 elephants in battle formation. No Greek army had ever faced this before. He solved the problem by outflanking them. But the fighting was the hardest of his career. His beloved horse Bucephalus was killed in this battle, the horse he had ridden since he was a teenager. And then there was the Mallian town. This is where Alexander should have died. His general screamed at him to stop. His bodyguards tried to pull him back. He reached the top of the wall, killed 3 defenders with his sword, and then jumped down inside the enemy fortification. Alone. He stood alone inside an enemy fortification against however many defenders were inside. His 3 companions who managed to follow him over the wall were cut down almost immediately. An arrow hit him in the chest. It penetrated his lung. He went down. His army outside thought he was dead. The rumor swept through the camp like a fire. Soldiers who had fought alongside him for a decade were collapsing in grief. His generals were already beginning to think about what came next. He was not dead. The shaft was removed from his chest in the field. He recovered. And he came out to his army on a stretcher just to show them he was alive. 6 times. 6 moments where any other man would have died, and every single time Alexander survived. Which makes what happened in Babylon even more extraordinary. By the time Alexander reached Babylon in 323 BCE, his body had been through things that no human body was designed to survive. The question of what killed him cannot be separated from the question of what the campaigns had done to him. He had marched his army through the Gedrosian desert on the return from India. It was the worst strategic decision of his career, and he knew it. The desert killed more of his soldiers than any battle had. Thousands of his soldiers died in that desert, not to Persian swords or Indian elephants, to heat and thirst and Alexander's own decision to take that route. He had also lost the person who mattered most to him. His closest friend, his companion since childhood, the man who had been at his side through every campaign. Hephaestion. Hephaestion died in Ecbatana in October 324 BCE from a fever. He was 35 years old. Alexander's reaction to Hephaestion's death shocked everyone who witnessed it. He refused to eat for 3 days. He ordered the manes of all the horses and mules in the army cut as a sign of mourning. He had Hephaestion's physician executed. He also ordered a period of mourning that included the extinguishing of the sacred fire that was carried before Persian kings on campaign. The fire that represented the living power of the king. He extinguished it for his dead friend. He drank more heavily after Hephaestion's death. His generals noted it. His behavior became less predictable. He planned campaigns that seemed to have no clear military logic. He executed officers for reasons that seemed inadequate. And yet even in this state Alexander was planning. He was planning to conquer Arabia, then Carthage, then Rome. He had already sent ships to survey the Arabian coast. He had ordered the construction of a massive new fleet. His generals were exhausted. His army was exhausted. His empire stretched from Macedonia to India, and the administration of it was already straining. None of this mattered to Alexander. He had conquered everything east of Macedonia. Now he wanted west, he wanted the Mediterranean, he wanted all of it. He would never launch those campaigns. Because in the first days of June 323 BCE, he accepted an invitation to a dinner party at the house of his general Medius. And whatever happened at that dinner party killed him. The dinner at Medius's house on the night of May 29, 323 BCE was not unusual by the standards of a Macedonian royal court. Alexander's court drank. Everyone drank. It was part of how Macedonian military culture worked. Alexander drank what the ancient sources describe as the Bowl of Hercules, a massive drinking vessel that he reportedly drained in one attempt. At some point during or after the drinking, he felt a sudden sharp pain. He was carried to his bed. He had a fever. His generals were called. His physicians were called. The army's best medical minds gathered around the man they had kept alive through arrows and spears and battles and deserts for 13 years. The fever did not break, it got worse. On the 6th day he could not speak. His generals, terrified at the rumors spreading through the army, demanded to be admitted to see him. They needed to see he was alive. He could not speak, but he raised his hand to each of them in recognition. The hand that had wielded a sword at Granicus and Gaugamela and the Mallian town, raised from a sickbed to acknowledge men who had followed it across the world. On the 11th day he was gone. The army's reaction to Alexander's death is one of the most documented and most dramatic moments in ancient military history. 30,000 soldiers who had marched with him from Macedonia to India refused to believe it. They demanded to see his body. The generals opened the palace to them. Tens of thousands of soldiers filed past Alexander's body in silence. Veterans of a dozen battles walking past the man who had led them to everyone. One ancient source records that a soldier stopped beside the body, looked at it for a long time, and then said quietly that he had thought this man was a god. He had thought the gods did not die. Now we get to the question that historians argue about in the same breath as the medical question. Was Alexander's death natural, or was it helped along by someone who had very good reasons to want him gone? Let us be honest about something. A very large number of very powerful people had reasons to want Alexander the Great dead by the spring of 323 BCE. First, Antipater, the regent of Macedonia. Alexander had ordered Antipater to Babylon. Everyone at court knew what a summons to Babylon from an angry Alexander meant. Antipater had seen what Alexander did to generals who disappointed him. He had seen Philotas executed. He had seen Parmenion killed on Alexander's orders. He was next. Second, Alexander's own generals in Babylon. Alexander had already planned the next phase of campaigns. Arabia, then west. The generals who had followed him for 13 years were not young men anymore. They had families. They had territories they wanted to govern. They had ambitions that did not include dying on another battlefield 10,000 miles from home. Third, Olympias, Alexander's own mother. Olympias wanted Alexander back in Macedonia. She wanted him governing the homeland and building a dynasty. She had been fighting Antipater for years. The last thing she wanted was her son embarking on another decade of campaigns that left Macedonia effectively ungoverned. Here is what makes the poison theory genuinely plausible beyond the politics. The pattern of Alexander's death matches what a deliberate poisoning would look like in the ancient world. The ancient sources name Antipater as the most likely suspect. They say his son Cassander carried the poison to Babylon inside a mule's hoof. The specific detail of the mule's hoof suggests a source with operational knowledge of how the poison was transported. Cassander was in Babylon. He was present. He had access to Alexander's household. The opportunity existed. And here is the military argument for why the timing was not accidental. Antipater's summons had arrived. He had weeks at most before he needed to leave for Babylon or face Alexander's wrath. If he was going to act, he needed to act immediately. The timing of Alexander's illness matches the timing when a man in Antipater's position would have had to make a decision. But here is also the military argument against it. The most successful assassination in history leaves no trace. The best poisoners in the ancient world were not discoverable. If Antipater's faction poisoned Alexander, they had the political power afterward to ensure the story died with the king. Whatever killed Alexander the Great, the consequences of his death were immediate, catastrophic, and shaped the world for the next 300 years. His generals asked him on his deathbed who should inherit his empire. The ancient sources say he answered with 2 words: to the strongest. Those 3 words ignited 40 years of warfare between his generals. The wars of the Diadochi, the conflicts of the successors. Every single one of his major generals died violently in these wars. Every single one. Perdiccas killed in a mutiny. Antipater dead of old age within a year, but his son Cassander continuing his wars. Eumenes executed by Antigonus. Antigonus killed at Ipsus. Seleucus assassinated. Lysimachus killed at Corupedium. Cassander, Antipater's son, the man the ancient sources name as the person who carried the poison to Babylon, ended up as king of Macedonia. He had Alexander's surviving family members systematically murdered. Alexander's mother Olympias, Alexander's wife Roxana, and Alexander's son, young Alexander IV, who was killed at 13 years old, the last direct heir. After Alexander died, something happened that none of his generals or physicians had expected, and that none of them ever fully explained. His body did not decay for 6 days. In the heat of a Babylonian summer with no modern preservation methods, his body remained unchanged for 6 full days. His physicians believed he was still alive. They thought he was in a coma. They debated whether to treat him as dead or as living. Modern researchers have suggested this non-decomposition could itself be a clue to how he died. Some poisons preserve tissue. Some diseases cause a state so close to death that the body's decomposition processes are slowed. The question of what killed Alexander the Great remains open. 2,300 years of historians, physicians, toxicologists, and military scholars have examined every piece of evidence. Was it disease? Was it the accumulated damage of 13 years of the most brutal campaigning in the ancient world? Was it the arrow wound at the Mallian town coming back to destroy his lungs years later? Was it grief after Hephaestion? Was it the drinking? Was it poison from Antipater's family? The most honest answer is that we do not know. And that is itself an extraordinary thing. Alexander the Great survived every enemy. He beat every army. He crossed every desert and mountain and river that anyone put in his path. He was wounded again and again and came back every time. And in the end, what stopped him was something he never saw coming. Something that hit him not on a battlefield but at a dinner table. The greatest warrior in history killed not by a sword or an arrow or an elephant or a desert, but by whatever entered his body at a dinner party in Babylon on a warm June night in 323 BCE. His killer has never been identified. His body has never been found. And the mystery of what killed Alexander the Great is still the greatest unsolved question in military history.